Well, Neil, we are wrapping up our conversation of Esther chapter 4, and as we mentioned yesterday, when we get into some of these great chapters, particularly in smaller books, we kind of touch on the whole content of the whole book. But in this case, it can't be helped because what unfolded here was an ugly plot by Haman to destroy all the Jewish people. And Esther, of course, had become the queen, and she was a Jew. And her uncle, Mordecai, was prominent in and around the palace there and so forth, and had a place of service. Well, he's compelled her to stand up and to intercede for the people. And as we noted yesterday, his famous statement in verse 14, he says, "Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" And verse 15 says, "Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer, Go gather together all the Jews that are present at Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So Neil, if folks are not aware of the reason for her statement, "If I perish, I perish," she didn't have access to come before the king. Mm-hmm. And literally, folks, if I guess, Neil, if the king was in a bad mood, wouldn't matter if you're the queen or not. It doesn't stretch forth the scepter. You're just out of luck.
Yeah, she says it was the law of his, right? That if anybody, man or woman, came to his court and he didn't extend that thing, it'd be death.
Wow. You would think the queen wouldn't have to worry about such a thing, but there you go. So the seriousness of the moment begins to unfold here. I don't know if you and I can get ourselves in a mode of thinking, transport ourselves into the circumstances here a little bit so we can understand how serious this was. First of all, we have this decree that's went out that all the Jewish people are going to die on a certain day. Haman has plotted this thing. The king put his stamp of approval on it. Now we have Queen Esther, who's become aware of this situation. She has to go before the king, and her life's at stake. She doesn't know how this is going to turn out. So did you notice, folks, that Esther and her maidens and Mordecai and those around him, the other Jews, they fasted? Mm-hmm. This is an example in the Bible of how prayer and fasting sometimes is connected together. And it seems, Neil, that generally fasting comes into the picture when the situation is more dire.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in this situation and others we read in Scripture, it's like they don't have any other options. There's some sort of devastation, or they're desperate. And that's when they fast. Now, perhaps we could do it before we get to that point sometimes, and for other reasons.
Right, other reasons.
But when it comes to things that are pressing, hopefully, sometimes I think we don't maybe even think of that as followers of Christ in the New Testament. But that ought to be our natural inclination is, we need to pray and we need to fast about this because we need an answer from the Lord. Well,
that's a good point. Obviously, with these circumstances and the situation being so dark. I mean, this is not good. This is a crisis for the Jewish people, and they don't have 40 days to pray and fast. They don't have, the luxury of an extended period of time to try to seek the Lord. It's a crisis. They've got to seek God, so they really humble themselves. We might find ourselves in those kind of situations where we really need to humble ourselves, and we can discern, that we have to put fasting with the prayer. Well, that's what happened here. And so Esther, she's going to find her way into the king's presence here as this final part of the history plays out. But Haman, he's the troublemaker. And he's the wicked man behind all of this. And boy, he's flying high. Mm-hmm. He's flying high, boy. He's even building the gallows for his enemy, But you mentioned this the other day, how that the king, verse chapter 6 talks about, the king couldn't sleep, and he brought the book of records of the Chronicles out, and he discovers that Mordecai had basically saved his life, right?
Right, yeah, he had heard of a plot to kill the king, if I remember. I didn't read it today.
Right.
And then he had alerted him, and the king, he couldn't sleep one night, and he wanted the history, basically his own history read to him or something like that. And that brought out how Mordecai had done this and at least alerted them to this plot. Yeah.
Yeah. And folks, if you're familiar with the details of how things continue to play out, Haman has to, after the king wants to honor Mordecai, he has to lead Mordecai through the streets, you know. This is the man that he hates, you know. It's tragic that you would hate anybody, but the man was in a mess. He hated Mordecai. He wanted to kill him. But now he's got to lead him through and proclaim this wonderful, acknowledgement from the king. And then, of course, there's a banquet, a little dinner, you might say, between the king, Haman, and Esther. And then it all begins to come out. And folks, as the king becomes aware of Haman's plot, not only to kill all the Jews, but kill his wife, because she would have been subject to this. All of a sudden, this whole thing turns. And those gallows that he had made for Mordecai, he died on those, didn't he?
Right. Yep.
Folks, you can't prosper. You can depart from God and you can live a wicked life, but you can have a little season where it looks like you're on top of the world. But I'm going to tell you something. You will reap what you sow. God is not mocked. Whatsoever man sows, he'll reap. You want to live in rebellion against God, disregard the Lord, go against him, and you're going to perish. So think about that. Our time's up for today. God bless you.